Welcome to As We Get Older. I'm Laura Orndeff, and this video is directed to those of you who have purchased a final resting place, a plot, a crypt, whatever. My question to you is, do you have the paperwork? Do you have the documentation? If the answer is yes, my follow-up question is, have you laid eyes on it recently? Is it in a bank vault? Is it in a locked box? Because I'm sure you've known one or two people who have claimed they have stored something of value in a certain place. They go to it, it's not there. And I'm sure all of you have experienced loss or, grief at some point. And when you have just lost somebody you loved, that is not the time you want to spend looking for paperwork and documentation. So I would encourage you, if you have any doubt, any question, again, or if it's been, and it's not uncommon that you may have purchased the plot 30 years ago, call the cemetery, call the funeral home that's associated with the cemetery and just say, hey, just checking in. This is where I believe my plot is. This is my documentation, and just kind of make sure everybody's on the same page. Also, while you're on the phone with them or in person, if you're talking that way, ask them what steps do my loved ones need to do? Do they need to bring the documentation? Do you have the documentation on file? They just say, hey, activate it. What is that next step? Now, the reason I'm really kind of bringing this one up is, and I wish I were making this up. I wish this were not a real situation, but in my town, we had two funeral homes. One went bankrupt. The bankrupt funeral home owned the main cemetery. Now, when Mom passed, the state was in the process of transferring the cemetery to the other funeral home. And when I met the gentleman, they, absolutely wonderful guys, amazing guys. But when they pulled up, they got out of the car and they pulled this plank of wood, I don't know, so big, and there were all these pencil scratches all over it. And seriously, this plank of wood looked as if they had picked it up from a construction dumpster. And they basically were trying to make the best they could out of the situation. The bankrupt funeral home had such horrible record keeping. They were trying to figure out the best they could. What really stuck in my brain, they told me a lady a few weeks before Mom had passed had contacted them. She didn't have the paperwork. She had bought a couple of plots. She didn't have the paperwork. She couldn't find anything, but she had a receipt from the funeral home, the bankrupt funeral home, for the amount, which would have been about appropriate for a plot, but it didn't say what it was for. And so the other funeral home, gave her credit out of, the goodness of their heart. They were trying to work with her. But the bottom line is she didn't have paperwork. So that's something to, again, have those conversations now. I don't want to scare anyone. I don't want to frighten anyone, but the whole thing is just talk to them. Now, while I'm talking about final resting places, I want to mention if you have pre-purchased funeral home. Again, I don't know the terminology, but if you have gone ahead and kind of planned your funeral and you've prepaid for it, find out what are the steps. Again, do the people who are going to be doing your funeral, do they even know you've done this? Because let's say you pass away and you've not told anybody, they may go out, buy new plots, go to a different funeral home, and just communicate this. But when I pre-purchased Dad's, I went ahead and just kind of looking ahead, I went and talked to them, and I did ask the question, what happens if you go bankrupt? Now, the particular funeral home I used had been around for decades, but I did ask the question. Now, this is where I'm going to pause. You've heard this in different videos. You've got to talk to your financial, legal, funeral home. You've got to talk to those experts and find out what is appropriate in your situation. In my situation, what ended up doing was they took the money and they put the money in a bank, in a CD that was technically mine, but it was written so that at Dad's passing, I just signed some paperwork, and they cashed it out on my behalf. So the money was not stored with the funeral home. Now, I don't know what laws are in place in different states, different counties, different cities. I don't know any of that. That is where I'm saying talk to an attorney. If you are thinking about this stuff, make sure you're comfortable because, funerals are not inexpensive. You want to make sure that that investment is safe if an institution fails. So you just want to be aware of that. But the whole thing I want to make sure you're communicating is to the people who be doing your funeral. Hey, I have done A, B, C, and things are located A, B, C. Have that communication. Talk to each other. Just so there's no surprises and there's no last minute scrambling to figure out what's going on. So hopefully I've given you a few things to think about in this video. Please explore other videos on my YouTube channel. If you like what you see, click the subscribe button and I'll see you in the next video.